It was a hot and steamy summer evening near Tequesta, Florida. It was August of 2021, and Leon had been working late designing kitchen remodels in Stuart, Florida. He was on his way home, driving south down US 1 just after sunset between 8:30 and 9 p.m. It was getting dark outside, but there was still an orange glow in the western sky. The road was quiet, with just another pickup truck approaching his truck from behind. He noticed something very large walking on the west side of the road going north, so approaching him. It was between the highway edge and the tree line, but closer to the tree line than the highway. It was just outside the Jonathan Dickinson State Park. He explained, "My best description of what it was would be a huge football player in full shoulder padding, between 6 and 7 feet tall, wearing a full-length, long, shaggy fur coat. Except it was in August in South Florida. Who would be wearing a fur coat? Who in South Florida even owns a fur coat?" He slowed way down as he became level with it, and the truck that was behind him had now passed him. So he also had the benefit of their full-beam headlights. The other truck slowed way down as it approached it, then accelerated at a high speed away from it. Someone else has the same story to tell. They saw that thing and noped the fuck out of there. When he was parallel with it, he got a better look. It had the face of an ape with a bump on the top of its head. The fur was long and looked white, kind of like a dirty white shag pile carpet. After reading a report from a person who said it was silver, he figured it could be true, as he was seeing it from just moonlight and vehicle headlights. I later found out that the white-haired ones are thought to be older skunk apes, kind of like when people get old and their hair turns white. It just continued to walk. It didn't turn to look at him or run away. It just focused straight ahead. No fucks given. He hadn't told anyone up until yesterday because he figured nobody would believe him. But he was just at a prospective client's home who happens to work in Jonathan Dickinson Park, so he mentioned it to him. His client seemed to believe him and told him that he was lucky because he'd seen one and the client had not. This was just one of the 338 documented sightings of the Florida Bigfoot, also known as a skunk ape. This puts Florida at third in the nation for Bigfoot sightings, behind California with 461 and Washington with 710. The skunk ape gained popularity throughout the 1970s. From the Panhandle to the Everglades, folks spot the skunk ape on a regular basis. However, the United States National Park Service considers the skunk ape to be a hoax. Of course. Although the hundreds of credible witnesses say otherwise. In its appearance, the skunk ape looks about how you'd expect from a Bigfoot, a hybrid of a human and a gorilla. It's stocky, covered in hair, and walks on 2 legs. Most accounts of it report it's about 7 feet tall and up to 500 pounds. It's slightly smaller than the northwestern Bigfoot. It's considered to be a subspecies of Bigfoot. It's its southern cousin. Its hair is a reddish brown, or dirty white. It has glowing red eyes, which is unusual for primates because most primates lack the layer of tissue behind the retina that reflects light. The skunk ape's most obvious characteristic is its terrible odor, which gives it its name. The stench is described as a combination of a wet dog, a skunk, and rotten eggs. The skunk ape's foul stench is theorized to be caused by methane released by the swamps it resides in. Another theory, held by at least a few researchers, is that they sleep underground in abandoned alligator dens and absorb some of the swamp gases. The fur absorbs the pungent methane and releases the odor, kind of like me in an elevator. Their diet could be another reason, as they consume a larger amount of vegetation than a typical omnivorous Sasquatch living in other areas of the country. Seminole and Miccosukee culture has several stories of a foul-smelling, physically powerful, and secretive creature called Esti-Jabjaki, a name which roughly translates to tall man. He is the protector of the woods, and he keeps away those who would damage the forests. Even when you don't see the Florida skunk ape, he sees you, forever vigilantly gazing over those who enter his domain and using his mystical powers to vanish into thin air. According to the lore, the Seminole tribes recounted their experiences with the monster to the first European explorers. But it wouldn't take long until the new visitors made their own acquaintance with the cryptic beast. Its origins date back thousands of years, and it could even be that these creatures aren't physical creatures at all, but spiritual in their very nature. The legend has it that they were once men who turned their back on society, ran off into the wilderness, and took up a life of magic and heathenry. The trees, plants, and wildlife around them absorbed them, so to speak. These men began growing hair all over their bodies, to which plants and greenery of all kinds would attach itself to, like Swamp Thing. The skunk ape has been reported as appearing in Florida, Georgia, and Alabama folklore since European settlers first occupied the region. In 1818, local newspapers reported a story from what is now Apalachicola, Florida, that spoke of a man-sized monkey raiding food stores and stalking fishermen along the shore. There have been a metric shit ton of sightings of the skunk ape. There's way too many to go through them all, so I'll give you the rundown on the significant ones. The last one, and most recent encounter, gets me excited. No, not that way. The first sighting of the skunk ape was during the Seminole Wars in 1816. People would stumble upon the skunk ape during their battles near the Miami River, Big Cypress, and Green Swamp. Man, I'd really lose my shit if I saw something like that with everything else that was going on at that time. It seems as though early European Americans may have gotten on the bad side of the creature. As the legend goes, in the early 19th century, a violent encounter between a hunting party and a Sasquatch ended with the deaths of several people and eventually the skunk ape itself. The remaining hunters surveyed the corpse of the Sasquatch and reported huge measurements, possibly up to 13 feet tall and well over 1,000 pounds. Because they were in a hurry to get the hell out of the area before more of the creatures arrived, the men did not take the body with them. And could you imagine trying to fireman's carry something that huge out of the woods? The earliest published report of a skunk ape is from Suwannee County in 1942. A man was driving home one evening after work. He was on a 2-lane road and came to a stop sign. As he started pulling away, he felt a hard thump and his truck rocked to the left hard. He thought a deer ran into him. He looked back and reported that a tall, hairy creature had hitched a ride on one of his running boards for over half a mile, then jumped off while his truck was still moving. He looked in his rearview mirror and saw it run off to the side into the palmettos. Since then, the popularity of the skunk ape in southern Florida has continued to grow, along with the number of sightings. In 1957, 3 hunters were asleep in their tents when one of the creatures invaded their camp in the Big Cypress National Preserve, east of Naples in the southwestern corner of the state. The distance between Suwannee County, the previous sighting, and Cypress National Preserve is nearly 400 miles. So either it's very mobile or there's more than one. It was 1974, a few years after his father had come upon a set of footprints left by the Everglades version of Bigfoot. Dave was out hunting with his older brother Jack in the swamp behind his house. It was in what's now Big Cypress National Preserve when he encountered the ape incarnate. Man, there must be a whole community of them in there. It was walking across the swamp and my brother spotted it first, but I couldn't see it over the grass. I wasn't tall enough, Dave says. My brother picked me up and I saw it about 100 yards away. We were just kids, but we'd heard about it and knew for sure what we were looking at. It looked like a man, but completely covered in hair. He and his brother stared at the creature, mouths agape. But almost at the same time, the skies opened and rain poured down. The monster hurried away into the cypress mounds scattered amongst the marsh. Holy crap, he remembers thinking. I finally saw this damn thing and it got away, just like that. But the short-lived moment left an unforgettable impression on young Dave Sheely, who's now 60 years old. In the decades since, he's relentlessly pursued skunk apes and seen them on 3 other occasions. He's written a field guide, made several TV appearances, continually investigated reported sightings, and established a skunk ape research headquarters on his property where tourists can learn all about the legendary creature. Can you say obsessed? He bills himself as the Jane Goodall of skunk apes. I am the expert, he told a Bigfoot website last year. the state and county expert on the Florida Skunk Ape, and have been for years. He's like the skunk ape whisperer. The earliest sighting listed on the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization website was in November of 1981. It was near Perry, Florida. That's right, they named the city after me. Mike had grown up in Taylor County, Florida, and had hunted and fished the area all his life. When he was 16 years old, he joined with his stepfather, as well as the rest of his family and an older friend, Aaron, on a hunting trip. It was a remote and primitive hunt camp on some property the family owned for a weekend of hunting and camping. They had been there several times before and were familiar with the area. They had rugged, homemade lean-tos to sleep under and a fire pit. Hell, that's all you need, man. His stepfather and Aaron were both experienced woodsmen and noticed that the swamp noises usually heard were absent on this outing. Mike commented, "Usually we would hear lots of frogs and insects and stuff, but this time the woods were just dead. No animal noises." That's a huge red flag. During the days leading up to the encounter, the whole family often heard vocalizations that they could not explain. Mike stated that they sounded like whoop calls, starting out low and gaining a higher pitch at the end. He said that they were sometimes a solo vocalization, or at other times, multiple vocalizations from different parts of the woods. It was like they were calling out to each other. Each sounded sort of the same, but you could tell a difference between each one because the tone was a little different. It was sort of like two people saying the same word, but you know it's from two different people. That'd be creepy as hell, man. Even though it sounded kind of like an owl, it was like no animal noise he had ever heard before. Mike also noted that the family would at times encounter a horrible smell while hiking through the woods. You gotta stop eating those baked beans before you go on those hikes. Mike described a feeling of being watched that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up when he was alone. They would often hear lots of knocking that, like the vocalizations, were sometimes singular in nature or coming from different parts of the woods. You might hear 2 or 3 knocks, then it got quiet. Or you might hear 2 or 3 knocks in one direction, and a few minutes later, 2 or 3 knocks coming from somewhere else. It sounded like a big solid stick being banged against the tree. We really didn't know what was going on. Sometime during the night, between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., Mike awoke to the sounds of gunfire and the sound of his stepfather yelling at the top of his lungs. "Get out of here! I'll send you straight to hell, you bastard!" Just after the gunfire and yelling ceased, Mike heard what he described as something huge running into the woods, breaking limbs and crashing into trees. By then, the whole family was awake and wondering what in the hell's going on. Mike said that it was his stepfather that fired the rifle and that he appeared agitated and scared. You think? After around 10 minutes, they all heard the sound of 2 or 3 distinct wood knocks that came from the area the intruder had just ran into. His stepfather would later describe what he saw that night to Mike. He stated that he couldn't sleep because he just felt that something just wasn't right. At some point during the night, he was about to get up to stoke the fire. When he heard something creeping up to his lean-to. He saw what he described as a tall figure, about 7 to 8 feet tall, looming over him, peering into his lean-to. Oh, fuck that. He refused to talk about it in any detail, only later on saying that it looked like a big hairy ape. And he was adamant that it wasn't a bear or a human. It was barely human. Mike stated that he really didn't know if his stepfather shot at the creature or shot up in the air. Does it matter? Just after his stepfather fired the gun, Mike stated that when he awoke, there was an overwhelming, horrendous odor that permeated the area around the camp. His stepfather probably shit his pants. He stated that it was sort of like a skunky smell, but worse. He said that he had smelled skunks in the past, but this was far, far worse. It was like nothing I had ever smelled before, or since. After this incident, Mike has refused to go back to the area. He continued to hunt from time to time, but he has vowed to never go back to that area again, even though his family owned the property. In the summer of 2000, the police of Sarasota County, Florida, received a letter from an anonymous woman. With the letter were 2 attached photographs of what the woman said was an escaped orangutan who had been stealing apples from her back porch for 3 nights in a row. These photos were later found to be taken near the Myakka River. After the images were released to the public, cryptid enthusiasts dubbed the creature in the photograph the Myakka Skunk Ape. The woman describes the events leading up to the photographs being taken.
For 2 nights prior, it had been taking apples that my daughter brought down from up north off our back porch. These pictures were taken on the 3rd night it had raided my lemons. Those whores.
She was pretty sour about that, wasn't she? She went out into her backyard after hearing deep whomp noises. She aimed her camera toward the hedgerow at the back of her property and was startled to see what her flash revealed.
I didn't even see it as I took the first picture because it was so dark. As soon as the flash went off for the 2nd time, it stood up and started to move. I then heard the orangutan walk off into the woods.
She noticed that its awful smell lasted long after it had left her yard. Reflecting on what had occurred, she said that the creature sounded much further away than it turned out to be. She thinks she was about 10 feet away from it, and it looked like it was crouching. Then it stood up. She notes it is hard to know how big it was, but she would judge it to be about 6.5 to 7 feet tall. As soon as she realized how close it was, she got back into the house. Probably a good idea. The woman photographer remarks,
"It only came back one more night after that and took some apples that my husband left out in order to get a better look at it. We left out 4 apples. I cut 2 of them in half. The orangutan only took the whole apples. We didn't see it take them. We waited up, but eventually had to go to bed."
Then they placed a dog in their backyard, and the animal did not return. And as recently as December of 2022, an encounter with the elusive cryptid was reported about 20 miles southeast of Tampa, which is not that far from where I live. It took place in the Cheeto Nature Preserve near Lithia, Florida. It was extremely foggy, and the first cold front of the season was rolling in, which means it was dipping down into the 50s. At about 10:30 p.m., the witness heard loud whooping noises, then a loud, prolonged Bigfoot yell. It made 3 separate calls, each one louder than the last. The first call almost sounded like a hoot owl. But as it got louder, the witness could tell it was coming from Cheeto Park. The last call was very loud and was a dead-on textbook Bigfoot call. They also heard loud thuds while they were putting the chickens up at night. It sounded like someone was throwing rocks, which makes sense because the entire area is covered with baseball-sized rocks. The Cheeto Nature Preserve has walking trails through it, but can be hard to venture through it due to the amount of standing water everywhere. It's very swampy, with heavy oak tree areas and large patches of pine trees. It's a very large and perfectly preserved habitat. Of course, the typical knee-jerk reaction from skeptics is that it's all just a stunt to sell souvenirs to tourists or to reserve swamp tours. I understand where they're coming from on that. However, the folks that reported the initial sightings continue to hunt for the skunk ape to this day and have remained steadfast in their assertion of the creature's existence, despite public scrutiny. So, make of that what you will. Most wildlife officials dismiss the sightings as the misidentification of black bears. Black bears are common throughout Florida. Moreover, it is notable that the areas with the greatest concentrations of skunk ape sightings seem to line up well with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission's black bear distribution maps. It is entirely plausible to assume at least a few sightings can be attributed to mistaken identity, but not all of them. Another explanation for the skunk ape, often touted by wildlife officials, are escaped orangutans or great apes. There are primate research and breeding facilities all over Florida, with 4 in rural Hendry County. Hendry County's southern border is adjacent to the Big Cypress Preserve, where many sightings of the skunk ape have occurred. Of course, these breed and house monkeys, not great apes or orangutans. So escapees from here are probably not behind the skunk ape phenomenon, because most people can tell the difference between a 3-foot monkey and a 7-foot ape man. However, it is not out of the question that a variety of primates live and thrive in the warm climate of places like the Everglades. There are also known feral monkey populations in several locales in Florida, as well as a facility that houses great apes, retired or rescued from testing facilities. If one of those apes escaped from the facility, it's possible someone could mistake a great ape for a skunk ape. So, what do we make of the skunk ape? Is it a real creature? Is it a tourist trap? Or is it a misidentified escaped orangutan or great ape? I think a few of the sightings can be chalked up to a logical explanation, but the vast majority cannot. Especially when given the history of the sightings. During the Seminole Wars, there were no primate research facilities in Florida. Moreover, back in the day, it wouldn't exactly have been a selling point to claim something as seemingly outlandish as a giant, furry, smelly monster wandering through your yard and trying to sell your wares based on that. You would have been ostracized and it would have hurt your business. Man, it's crazy how things have changed. The line between real animals and cryptids, it turns out, is much messier than you might imagine. Many critters once considered cryptids are now recognized by the scientific community. The devil bird, Zephyas, kangaroo, sea serpent or oarfish, Komodo dragon, and mountain gorilla, and that just scratches the surface. Already in 2023, there are 5 new species of animals once thought to be cryptids, but are now recognized by the scientific elite. It's just a matter of time before a body or a skeleton of a skunk ape is discovered, and then it'll be on the list of newly discovered animals. But until then, we'll just have to keep experiencing them, documenting and reporting everything, and eventually the experts will catch up.